No one ever sees it coming, not really. They might see the signs: mood swings, exhaustion, quiet withdrawals, but they never believe it'll end like this. Not with someone like Dick. He was the funny guy, the guy who always had a joke, a half-serious conspiracy theory, or a greasy snack in hand. He was messy, yeah, and maybe a little broken, but he had heart. He wanted to be happy. He tried. But by the time the end came, Dick had nothing left to give. Let's rewind to the last few weeks. Lisa was gone more than she was home. She'd fallen deep into her affair with the accountant from work, the love of her life. She called him. While she was playing out her fantasy, Dick was doing everything else. All the cooking, all the cleaning, all the childcare. 3 kids, full-time solo. He worked from the basement, hunched over a laptop between diaper changes and dinner prep, pretending everything was fine. He told Buddy, "I'm just trying to hold it together until the kids are older." But the cracks were widening. Lisa made it worse. Every day she came home with new resentment. She complained that she was trapped, that she had married beneath her, that she could have been living in a 6-bedroom house with a pool if she'd chosen right, if she'd picked Buddy. She said it out loud, to Dick's face, over and over. She didn't even say it to hurt him. She said it like it was fact. And Dick, he stopped defending himself. He stopped speaking up at all. He'd made mistakes, sure, but he had tried. He had sacrificed. He had done more than most people would for a partner like Lisa, and he had nothing to show for it but exhaustion and contempt. When he called Buddy that final time, it wasn't a cry for help, it was a goodbye. "Dude, trust me, I know, leave her," Buddy said. The words were simple, honest, direct. It was the last thing he ever said to his best friend. That night, everything fell apart. Dick got drunk. Not the fun kind of drunk, the hollow, glassy-eyed, full-bottle kind. He woke Lisa up at 3 a.m. The house was quiet, the kids were asleep, the air was heavy. He stood over her, shaking, reeking of whiskey, eyes bloodshot. "I never loved you," he said. "You've never been enough." He told her about the prostitutes, about how he'd been paying for sex through most of their marriage, that it was the only time he felt like a man. Then he said he hoped she'd rot in hell. And before she could scream, before she could even react, he walked into the bedroom, shut the door, and pulled the trigger. The blast was loud. The blood covered everything: walls, sheets, her memory. She found him like that, and for once, she broke completely. By the time the paramedics arrived, Lisa was outside on the curb, barefoot and hysterical, rocking back and forth, screaming, "It's all my fault. It's all my fault. Kill me too." She kept repeating it, louder and louder, like if she screamed it hard enough, time would rewind. But it didn't. Buddy got the call that afternoon. He was at work, probably in some glass conference room, reviewing a strategy deck. The ringtone came in like a gut punch. Bob, Dick's dad, was on the line. His voice didn't break. It just faded. "Buddy, he's gone." The room tilted. Time slowed. Buddy didn't cry, not yet. He just sat there, stunned, staring at the floor like maybe the right words would crawl out of the carpet. The funeral was fast, small, intimate, and Buddy wasn't invited. Lisa told Bob he shouldn't be there, said it would cause drama, that his presence would complicate things. Bob, still numb with grief, agreed. Buddy didn't fight it. He didn't argue. Didn't push back. He stayed home, sat quietly with Jen, and let the grief come in waves. But something about it didn't sit right. Buddy had lost his best friend, the man who had betrayed him, the man who had saved him, the man who had, in the end, needed him more than ever, and he hadn't even been allowed to say goodbye. That silence, it haunted him. Weeks later, Bob called again. Lisa was a ghost, barely functioning. Bob and his wife Linda had taken in the 3 kids. Lisa worked, drank, and slept. Nothing more. But Bob had questions. "Buddy, she keeps saying it's her fault, that she ruined everything, that you shouldn't have been at the funeral." Then came the question that cracked everything wide open. "What don't I know?" Buddy paused. He thought about lying, about keeping the peace. But something inside him snapped, not out of anger, not for revenge, but because Bob deserved the truth. So Buddy told him everything, every detail, every secret, from the ghosting, to the cheating, to the abortion Lisa never told anyone about. He told him about Ray, about the swinger parties, about the drinking, the neglect, the affairs. He told him that Dick had been unraveling for years and Lisa had pulled every thread. And Bob, he listened, quietly. When Buddy finished, Bob didn't scream, he didn't curse. He just whispered, "Thank you," because now he understood. He didn't condemn Lisa, he didn't rage against her, he just understood. And that was enough. Bob and Linda kept raising the kids. They treated Lisa with kindness, not because she deserved it, but because the children did. They gave them love, stability, a life without shouting or secrets. But someday, those kids will be old enough to ask, why? And Bob will be ready, because he knows the whole story now, the real one, and that truth. That's the final act of Buddy's revenge. He didn't throw fists. He didn't scream at funerals. He just told the truth. And that truth, it'll echo forever. Most people think revenge has to be loud, explosive, dramatic, scorched earth, but not Buddy. His revenge, it was quiet, surgical, delivered with a steady hand and a calm voice. And it didn't land when Lisa cheated. Not when she ghosted him. Not even when she dragged his best friend into the mess. It landed that afternoon 1 year after Dick's death, when Buddy stood in Bob and Linda's living room, next to a plate of cookies no one had touched, and told the truth. It was Bob who asked for it. Gently grieving, desperate. Lisa was still saying it was her fault, still haunted, still ducking responsibility even as she whispered guilt into her wineglass. And Bob, trying to raise 3 kids while his daughter-in-law drank herself into oblivion, just wanted answers. What don't I know? He asked. But he could have said, it's not my place. He could have smiled politely and changed the subject. But instead, he said, Bob, I think it's time you knew the truth. And then he told him everything. No spin, no drama, just facts. How Lisa had gotten pregnant in college and never told Buddy, choosing instead to involve Dick and hide it forever. How she ghosted Buddy, turned down the job he helped her get, and ran off with Dick without even a conversation. How Dick had begged her to love him, and she'd used him like a human crutch. Every tear, every affair, every manipulation chipping away at him until there was nothing left. He told Bob how Lisa blamed Dick for not being enough, even as she stayed out all night with other men. How she turned their marriage into a power game. How she'd begged for permission to sleep with Ray. How she flaunted it, made Dick feel worthless, humiliated him into silence. How Dick told Buddy everything, late night confessions while playing WoW and pretending everything was normal. How every swing of Lisa's behavior came down to control, to punishing the man who had loved her too much and never learned how to leave. And finally, Buddy told him what Lisa said to Dick in their final months. How she compared him to Buddy. How she weaponized the idea of what could have been, and how Dick, already broken, believed her. By the end of it, Bob just sat there, tears in his eyes, nodding. Not in anger, but in understanding, because now it made sense. The confusion, the pain, the way Lisa had screamed, it's all my fault. It was, and she knew it, but she could never say it out loud. She could only collapse under the weight of it. Buddy left that day without asking for anything. No vindication, no closure. Just the knowledge that, finally, someone else understood the cost. Because that was the final blow. Not the career wins. Not the glow-up. Not the loving marriage with Jen. It was truth, delivered quietly, to the right person, at the right time. And now, that truth lives inside Bob and Linda. It waits calmly for the day when those 3 kids are old enough to ask why their father isn't here. And when they ask, Bob won't lie. He'll tell them what really happened, who their mom really was, and what she did. No edits, no soft landings, just the full weight of truth. That's Buddy's revenge. No fists, no fireworks. Just a quiet conversation in a quiet house, and a legacy that will last far longer than any scream ever could. You want to know the most savage revenge move in human history? Living well, not petty, not loud, not cruel. Just living with grace, love, purpose, and peace so completely and beautifully that the person who tried to destroy you is forced to watch you thrive. That's what Buddy did, and that's what made his revenge nuclear. Even after everything, even after she got what she wanted, freedom, a new man, another marriage, she still looked back. Still wondered, still hated that Buddy didn't crumble the way she hoped he would. She had watched him glow up from nerdy band kid to sharp-dressed, silver-haired powerhouse, saw him build a dream life with Jen. The Ivy League education, the mansion with the pool, the joyful kids who knew they were loved. A happy, whole family with no screaming matches, no secrets, no games. Lisa had no peace. She drank, she raged, because somewhere, deep down, she knew it could have been her. She could have had the life, but she couldn't have handled the love. She chose chaos over character, drama over devotion, and every year that went by, Buddy's life stood as a monument to the reality she threw away. Let's run the score. Buddy never retaliated. He never threw a punch, never made a scene. When Lisa ghosted him, he grieved, healed, and kept moving. When Dick confessed to betraying him, Buddy forgave. When Lisa banned him from the funeral of the man who broke both their lives, he respected it. And yet, every choice she made only elevated him. Because while Lisa chased affairs and flings and attention, Buddy poured love into Jen, into his kids, into a home that was a refuge. Every promotion, every glowing performance review, every new level of success came not from spite but from consistency, integrity, and hard work. He never stooped. And because of that, he soared. People noticed, old friends, mutual acquaintances, even Lisa's co-workers, who knew Buddy's name because Lisa couldn't stop bringing him up always coated in bitterness. Because Buddy, he's got the perfect life. And the worst part, it was true. Jen and Buddy never had to fake it. They were genuinely happy. They laughed a lot. They supported each other. Their home was filled with light, warmth, and respect. No mind games, no manipulation. That stability, it was Lisa's because she lived in a house filled with guilt. She still had 3 kids, but they were being raised by Bob and Linda and her. She was present in body, but checked out, emotionally vacant. She could smile for photos, sure, but deep down, she knew she had failed as a wife, a mother, a partner. And every time Buddy sent a Christmas card, every photo of his smiling kids and laughing wife was another reminder, another cut. The real punishment wasn't public humiliation. It was watching someone else live the life, she told herself. She deserved only to realize she'd never been capable of maintaining it. That's the thing about revenge. People think it's about pain, but real revenge, it's about clarity. It's about showing someone exactly what they lost and letting them sit with it. Lisa had no one to blame anymore. Not Dick, not Buddy, just herself. And Buddy, he never gloated, never rubbed it in. He just existed, successful, loved, thriving. That's what made it nuclear. He was the living proof that the problem had never been him. It had always been her. That's what drove her mad. He didn't just move on, he outgrew her. And when the truth finally landed, when Buddy told Bob everything, it cemented his legacy. Because now, the people who matter most, they know Dick's kids will grow up with the truth. Not to hate their mother, but to understand her. To protect themselves from becoming her. To break the cycle. And when they do, when they ask, what really happened, and Bob sits him down with quiet eyes and a heavy heart, Lisa's lies will collapse like paper walls. All thanks to buddies.com/patient honesty. The story could have ended 1,000 different ways, with fights, lawsuits, scandal, but instead, it ended with a man who chose to be better, to heal, to love harder, to let his life be the answer. That's nuclear revenge. And it leaves no survivors, only echoes. But he didn't just win, he thrived. His life became the mirror that reflected every mistake Lisa ever made. If that hits you in the gut, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. What's your version of living well, revenge? You ever seen someone get absolutely wrecked by a gummy bear? Not just any gummy bears. What started as a twisted game of bullying ended in blindness, blood, and a bathroom horror story so real it haunted the halls for years. And the best part, the revenge came in the sweetest, most unexpected way. Marco wasn't the kind of kid you'd notice unless you were missing a pen. Then you'd look down and realize it was already taken apart. It's spring-wound into some tiny sculpture, its ink casing rolling toward the edge of your desk like it had somewhere to be. That was Marco Quaye. Skinny. Always fiddling. He wore his backpack too tight, glasses just a little too big, and had the nervous energy of someone who never really knew what to do with his hands. He was the type of kid teachers liked because he didn't cause trouble, and the tight bullies loved because he never fought back. And then there was Polo. If Marco was a whisper, Polo was a foghorn at 7 a.m. Loud, heavy, always pushing people out of the way like the hallway was his private property. His arms looked like they could crush desks, not from muscle but sheer mass. He had this laugh that echoed down the corridors, more of a bark, really, and when you heard it, you knew someone was getting humiliated, and it wasn't going to be him. He rolled deep with 3 or 4 other kids who, honestly, probably just stuck with him so they wouldn't be next. They all smelled like Axe body spray and teenage malice. If someone got tripped, shoved, or had their lunch money mysteriously disappear, you didn't have to guess who was behind it. You just prayed it wasn't your turn next. Middle school is where kids start to shape into who they'll be or who they'll pretend to be to survive. Marco, with his geeky quirks and gentle voice, didn't stand a chance in the jungle that our school had become. Polo, on the other hand, thrived in it. He was the jungle, At first Marco and Polo had no reason to cross paths. They were from different planets orbiting the same sad star of adolescence. Marco stayed under the radar, quietly disassembling things that didn't belong to him but never doing harm. Polo looked for people like Marco to chew up and spit out, but only if they caught his attention. Then one day, Marco did something unthinkable. He took apart Polo's pen. Now, this wasn't some luxury fountain pen or heirloom writing instrument. It was a BIC crystal. You know, the kind you get in a pack of 10 for $1. But to Polo it didn't matter. That pen could have been made of gold for all he cared. It wasn't about the pen, it was about respect. Or, more accurately, the lack of it. Polo snapped. In front of everyone. I wasn't there for the actual moment, but the hallway buzzed with it for days. Did you hear what Marco did do? Polo was foaming. He's gonna destroy that kid. And he tried. That was the beginning of something ugly. You could feel it. The energy changed. Like the scent in the air before a storm. Polo had found a new target. Not because Marco fought back, he didn't, but because Marco was small, easy, and worst of all, he'd embarrassed Polo by touching his stuff without permission. Marco didn't tell anyone about what happened next, not the teachers, not his parents, maybe not even himself. But we saw it, his swollen eye, his limp, his wet hair one day when it hadn't rained. His backpack ripped like it had been torn by an animal. I asked him once what happened. He just muttered, "Bathroom, Polo," like he didn't even want to waste the syllables explaining. But I got the gist. Polo had thrown him into a stall, smashed his knee on the porcelain, shoved his face into the toilet bowl like some twisted flush of dominance, all because of a plastic pen. Most people would have backed off. Most people would have stayed away from Marco, afraid of being caught in Polo's warpath. But not Marco, and definitely not Polo. This was the beginning of a long, drawn-out bloodletting that no adult seemed to care about. But us kids, we were watching, we saw everything, and we weren't ready for what Marco was becoming. It was strange how something so small could trigger something so cruel. A pen, that's all it took. Polo didn't even need a reason. Not really. But once Marco gave him one, however accidentally, it became a matter of dominance. This wasn't about a cheap pen anymore, it was about proving a point. The next day, Marco came to school limping. He had burned at the tip like someone lit it with a lighter and watched it curl. His hoodie was stained mud. Maybe, or worse, and his hands trembled just a little when he sat down. That was the first visible blow. The first public bruise. The start of Polo's reign of silent terror. Nobody said a word. No one asked what happened, because in middle school there's an unwritten law. You don't get involved. You don't stand out. You don't draw Polo's attention. And if Marco wanted to stay alive figuratively or literally, he needed to learn that fast. But Marco wasn't the kind of kid who ran. He wasn't brave. Not in the jock sense. Not in the movie hero kind of way. He was the kind of brave that didn't know when to stop. The kind that kept showing up day after day, like he hadn't been dunked in toilet water or thrown into lockers. That annoyed Polo even more. So things escalated. First it was casual shoves in the hallway, a watch where you're going that knocked Marco into a water fountain. Then it was tripping him in the lunchroom. One day, Polo grabbed Marco's tray and flipped it, spaghetti slapping onto his shirt like blood splatter, and Polo just laughed. Laughed so hard he turned red in the face, while Marco stood there, cheeks flushed, looking down at the mess like it didn't even belong to him. The worst part, nobody helped him clean up. Even the lunch lady just tossed him a paper towel and waved him off like he was an inconvenience. Some of the teachers knew what was happening. You could see it in the way they looked at Polo and then quickly looked away. Maybe they'd dealt with his parents before. Maybe they just didn't want the hassle. Maybe they thought, like so many adults do, that this was just kids being kids. But it wasn't. This was war, a one-sided war. And Marco was losing. He started sitting alone, even more withdrawn than usual. He stopped disassembling pens, stopped talking, stopped making eye contact. His skin got paler and his arms thinner. His hoodie sleeves swallowed his hands, like he was trying to shrink away from the world. That's when the rumors started. That Polo had roughed him up in the bathroom again. That he'd ripped Marco's backpack off his shoulders and used it to drag him across the floor. That he shoved him into a stall and slammed the door until it broke. Some said they heard crying. Others said they heard nothing at all. But one day, Marco came to school with a black eye, a bandaged wrist, and half of his backpack strap hanging loose. No zipper, no books. Just a hollow, limp shell of a bag that barely clung to his back, and still no one did anything. He could have disappeared and most people would have just moved down the lunch line. Until the jock stepped in. But that's later. For now, the violence kept rolling, day after day, quiet and unpunished. Marco's life was an invisible horror show, a backstage tragedy no one had the courage to interrupt, for now. But Polo, he was living it up. He had the swagger of someone who thought they were untouchable. He strutted around the hall like a discount king, surrounded by his loser knights, tossing insults and trash like it was his royal duty. And Marco was his favorite target. He didn't just hurt Marco physically. He broke him in pieces socially, emotionally, psychologically, made him invisible, made him weak. That's what made the revenge so perfect, because Polo had no idea he was creating the exact monster who would eventually destroy him. With candy. But we're not there yet. Marco just took it blow after blow, humiliation after humiliation. And through it all, he never once lashed out, never told a teacher, never begged for help. He just kept showing up. And sometimes, the most terrifying revenge doesn't come from rage, it comes from patience. Marco had plenty. Some people break all at once with screaming, slamming doors, maybe a punch thrown at the wrong person. Marco didn't break like that. He broke quietly. He started missing days. At first, just one or two scattered throughout the week. But then his seat in class sat empty, the desk collecting dust and stray pencil shavings. No explanation, no sick notes, no parent phone calls, just absence. And when he did show up, it was like he wasn't really there. His eyes had no focus, he moved like he was underwater. His clothes hung off him like they belonged to someone else, someone who used to be Marco, but wasn't anymore. Someone whose body remembered how to walk, but not how to live. He didn't answer questions in class, didn't react when called on. Teachers started skipping over him entirely, like he was part of the furniture. And his bruises, they got worse. They started to appear in places that screamed deliberate. Rib-level shadows under his shirt, scratches across his arms, a limp that wouldn't go away. Once, during PE, he changed late and didn't realize someone had left the locker room door open. That's when people saw them, the bruises, angry, blotched things, climbing his spine like a map of every beating he'd silently endured. Someone whispered, "Dude, what the hell happened to him?" Nobody answered, because deep down, we all knew, Paulo. It was always Paulo. And the school. They did what schools always do. The bare minimum. They sent Marco to the counselor once, probably checked a few boxes, maybe handed him a stress ball and a pamphlet about resilience. Nothing changed. Then came the worst day. The day Marco disappeared from class halfway through third period and didn't come back. At lunch, the whispers started. He's in the bathroom. With Polo. No, they took him, Polo and his crew. Someone said he saw them drag Marco down the hallway, shoving him into the boys' room near the gym. That was the bad bathroom. The one with broken locks, cracked tiles, and sinks that never worked. The one teachers never checked. That was Polo's turf. And that day, he and his gang stripped Marco down to his boxers, took his clothes, his backpack, everything, told him to shove the boxers into the toilet and flush. Marco tried to resist. So Polo made sure he didn't try again. They didn't just humiliate him, they erased him. Then they left, laughing, tossing his backpack into a trash can like it was nothing. Marco stayed in that stall for 23 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock. When he finally came out, he walked straight to the nurse's office. Still damp, still shaking. They called his parents. The school tried to cover it up, said he'd damaged school property, tried to expel him for flooding the bathroom. But Marco wasn't entirely alone. Someone had caught Polo's gang on video laughing, pointing, rifling through Marco's stuff, tossing it around like loot. That footage leaked. Fast, suddenly the narrative flipped. The school didn't apologize, they never do, but they stopped trying to blame Marco. Instead, they called it a misunderstanding, gave Polo a few-day suspension, called his behavior troubling, not violent. Like that made a difference. Marco didn't come back for a while, and when he did, he was a shadow of himself, paler, thinner. He didn't speak, didn't look up. He walked the halls like a ghost, hugging the walls like he was trying to disappear into them. His eyes flicked around constantly, scanning corners like he was preparing for impact. And somehow, still, Polo wasn't done. The bruises kept appearing, between periods, during lunch, after school, always fresh, always in places you couldn't see unless you were looking for them. He was being hunted, stalked, and no one could or would stop it. He withdrew completely. No more eye contact, no more whispers, no more pet. Just a shell that showed up every day and quietly endured whatever new hell Polo had prepared for him. The silence around it became louder than the bullying itself. Because that's how this works, right? You push a kid until no one sees them anymore. And once they're invisible, you can do whatever you want. But Marco wasn't gone. He was watching, waiting, and when someone finally decided to step in, everything changed. But before we get to that, let me tell you one last thing. That hallway, after the bathroom incident when Marco returned, you could feel it. Something dark had settled behind his eyes. Not rage, not panic. Something colder, not the fire of revenge, the ice of it. And it was building. You'd think there was a limit, that at some point, even a monster like Polo would decide Marco had suffered enough. But there isn't always a bottom. Sometimes, bullies just keep digging, and Marco finally hit bedrock. It started like any other day: cold air, clattering lockers, the smell of disinfectant failing to mask teenage sweat. Marco walked into school wearing something new. A long, soft-looking knitted scarf. It was deep blue with flecks of gold, like a twilight sky. Not flashy, just beautiful. Real, handmade kind of beautiful. You could tell it meant something. He touched it, constantly adjusting it, smoothing it, like it was the one thing tethering him to the world. Rumor was, his grandfather made it before he passed. A final gift, a legacy, something crafted with love in every loop of yarn. And that's exactly what Polo saw: weakness. That day, Polo didn't push Marco into a locker, didn't trip him, didn't touch him at all. He just walked past, grabbed the scarf, and yanked it off Marco's neck. That was it. Marco froze. In disbelief. Polo just smiled, like he was holding a piece of meat, waved the scarf in front of his friends like it was a joke, then walked off, twirling it in his hand like a victory flag. Marco didn't cry, not then, but he didn't go to class either, just vanished. Later that day, right before last period, Polo returned. He had a bag in his hand, paper, slightly charred around the edges. He strolled into the classroom and slammed it down on Marco's desk like a trophy. "This your scarf?" he asked, grinning like a kid at Christmas. Marco looked up, already trembling. Polo didn't wait for an answer. He opened the bag, tilted it slightly, and ashes spilled out. Ashes, black, powdery, unmistakable, with a few singed strands of blue and gold still clinging together at the bottom, like ghosts of what used to be. Marco stared, just stared. Polo laughed, loud, piercing, like he'd just delivered the punchline of the world's greatest joke. Then he walked off, and Marco, he cried. Not loud, not messy, just this steady, silent leaking of grief from his eyes, like his soul had been poked full of holes. He gathered the ashes in shaking hands and didn't even blink as they smeared across his palms. That was it. That was the moment of the last straw. Because that scarf wasn't just cloth. It was memory, family, a message from someone who loved him in a world that didn't. And Polo burned it like it was trash. And Marco was done. He didn't scream, didn't shout, but if you were looking closely, if you were watching the way his fingers curled around the paper bag, you'd know. Something in him snapped. Something cold. Something final. He didn't come to school the next day, nor the day after. But on Monday morning, he walked into the building with a full backpack and a face like glass, clear, sharp, fragile if you didn't know better, unbreakable if you looked close enough. He didn't say anything. He just went to his locker, sat in his classes, ate his lunch, alone, and then, around noon, Polo strutted over to his desk like nothing had happened, smugged. Untouchable. Marco flinched, like he expected to be hit, but Polo didn't hit him. He just reached into Marco's backpack, and what did he find? Bags. Dozens of little plastic bags. Haribo, gummy bears, sugar-free. "Oh, you brought me snacks," he teased, already tearing into the first bag. How thoughtful. Loser. He dumped half the bag into his mouth in one go. Didn't even chew, just crunched and swallowed like the glutton he was. And Marco, he cried again. He cried, soft tears running down his cheeks. This time, the sobs didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes, it only takes one person to make the world feel less impossible. And for Marco, that person showed up right when everything seemed lost. He was the kind of guy nobody expected to care. The stereotypical jock built like a linebacker, breezed through classes with half a foot, always had some girl hanging off his arm. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't exactly involved either. Until he saw Polo stealing Marco's backpack. It was right after lunch. Polo thought no one was watching. He yanked the backpack off Marco's shoulder like it belonged to him, rifled through it in front of everyone, and started walking toward the trash can. And then boom, like lightning, the jock came out of nowhere and folded Polo. No warm-up, no warning. Just scooped him up and dropped him into a nearby trash can like he was taking out the garbage. Polo flailed, legs kicking, his posse frozen in shock. The hallway went dead silent. The jock didn't yell, didn't posture, just stood there with his arms crossed and said, calm as a stone, touch him again and I'll fold you in half next time. He got suspended, of course. Rules are rules. But when he came back, he did it again. Because Polo didn't learn. A week later, the same scene almost repeated, Polo cornering Marco by the lockers, sneering, ready to teach him a lesson, and boom, second trash can. Same jock. Less words. This time the school tried to threaten him harder. But his parents, they weren't having it. Turns out, they were lawyers. Big ones. Suing the school board kind of lawyers. And when the principal hinted at expulsion, they dropped a line like, try it and we'll own this district by next semester. So the school backed off. And Polo, he started keeping his distance. Didn't stop being Polo, but something changed. There was a new variable, a new threat. Someone who wouldn't sit back and let him ruin Marco's life. And even though it didn't solve everything, even though Marco still bore the scars, still walked like his bones ached from more than just bruises, it mattered. Because when you've been drowning for so long, even one hand pulling you up is enough to remind you there's air out there. And for the first time in months, Marco started to breathe again. He began sitting up straighter, stopped flinching when people walked by, started eating more, his shoulders slowly filling out his shirts again. He even smiled once, just once, in the corner of his mouth when the jock nodded at him in the hall. It wasn't a full comeback. Not yet. But it was the first sign that Marco hadn't been defeated. Just waiting, and now, he had a reason to believe in survival. He had backup, which made what came next all the more powerful. Because once he knew someone had his back, Marco didn't just get stronger, he got smart. They say every revenge story starts with a line that shouldn't be crossed. For Marco it was a scarf, not a fancy gadget, not some rare collectible, just yarn and memory. His grandfather, long gone by the time we entered middle school, had knitted it for him the year before he passed. Every loop in the thread was a goodbye. Every stitch a story Marco never got to finish hearing. It was his armor, a simple blue and gold scarf wrapped around a bruised neck, protecting what was left of a boy too broken to fight back. Until Polo noticed it. It wasn't hard to see why it caught his eye. Marco wore it every day. Never took it off. Even in class, he'd sit there, sleeves pulled over his hands, scarf draped around his shoulders like it was the only thing keeping him warm in a building full of cold people. And Polo couldn't let something sacred stay untouched. That week, Marco had started showing real signs of healing. Just barely. A few soft words to the jock, a small nod of thanks to a teacher who let him stay in during lunch. He was coming back to life. So naturally, Polo had to kill that spark. One afternoon, just before sixth period, it happened. I was there. Marco was at his locker, head down, putting away a book. Polo stormed past like a wrecking ball, snatched the scarf off Marco's neck with one hand, and kept walking. Marco didn't fight, didn't shout, just froze. His fingers hovered midair, like they were still holding something that had just vanished. His eyes didn't follow Polo. They just stared at the floor like maybe if he stood still enough, the scarf would come back. It didn't. The next day, Polo walked into class with a paper bag, a charred paper bag. He strutted straight up to Marco's desk like he was presenting an award, grinning ear to ear, and dropped it in front of him with a loud, crinkling thud. Thought I'd give this back, he said. Marco looked up, and Polo reached in, scooped a handful of ashes from the bag, and let them trickle through his fingers, onto Marco's desk, onto Marco's lap, onto the floor. Tiny flecks of black, with threads of burnt gold and melted blue tangled in the pile like ruined confetti. Marco didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even wipe the ashes off. Polo laughed loudly and walked back to his seat like he'd just delivered a masterpiece. And Marco, he sat there for the rest of the period with ashes in his hands. That was it. That was the final straw. Because Polo hadn't just burned a scarf, he burned a lifeline. The last thread connecting Marco to something pure, something kind, something worth believing in. And that day, something changed behind Marco's eyes. Not just pain, not just grief. Something colder, sharper, like all the emotions had drained out and made room for strategy, for a plan. He didn't lash out. He didn't go to a teacher. He didn't cry in the hallway like before. No, he got quiet, but not broken quiet. Calculating quiet, like he was finally done waiting for the world to fix itself, and he was going to do it his way. The Monday after the ashes incident, Marco returned to school, but this wasn't the same Marco who used to flinch at shadows or tremble under hallway lights. He looked calm, still pale, still thin, but calm in that eerie, unnerving way that makes you feel like something is about to happen even if you don't know what. His eyes weren't full of fear anymore, they were empty. focused, like a chess player staring at the board before checkmate. And the only clue, the backpack, it was full, not just full it bulging. People noticed it. He carried it with both straps, like it was heavy, not the usual heavy like it was packed for war. But Marco didn't say a word, didn't act suspicious. He went to his locker, sat in class, took notes like it was just another ordinary day. Then, at lunch, he opened the bag. That's when we saw them. Bags, dozens of them. Small, innocent-looking, crinkly plastic bags. Haribo, sugar-free, gummy bears. He set them out one by one on the lunch table like a weird little candy shop. Colorful, cheerful bears smiling through the packaging. Most people didn't care, but Polo noticed, and Polo was hungry. He'd eaten two Pop-Tarts and half a slice of someone else's pizza by third period. His stomach was probably just a bottomless pit by then. So when he saw the candy, he didn't ask, didn't hesitate, just strutted up to Marco's table, grabbed a handful of the gummy bags, and said, "Don't mind if I do, freak." Marco didn't move, didn't stop him, didn't even look up, just sat there, face blank. Polo tore into the first bag with the kind of enthusiasm only a glutton could manage, poured half of it into his mouth like he was trying to win an eating contest. Barely chewed, just swallowed and reached for the next bag, and the next, and the next. No one said anything. Why would they? To them it was just another day, another bully taking what wasn't his, another victim sitting quietly and letting it happen. But if you were really watching, you'd have seen Marco's eyes, just the tiniest flicker. Not joy, not even satisfaction, just anticipation. Because Marco knew something that Polo didn't, and what he knew, it was deadly. Sugar-free Haribo gummy bears. The internet knew, veteran snackers knew, anyone who'd read the reviews on Amazon definitely knew. These weren't candy, they were chemical warfare. They looked innocent, but inside those bright, smiling bears lived a sinister force. A sugar substitute called lycosine, and in high doses, it turns your digestive system into a war zone. Cramping, sweating, explosive, diarrhea, blood vessels popping from strain, stomach pain so severe it's been compared to appendicitis. Marco didn't need fists to fight back. He just needed bait. And Polo. He took it, all of it. By the end of lunch, he'd eaten at least 5 bags. By the time last period rolled around, he was already sweating, fidgeting in his seat, shifting side to side like he couldn't get comfortable. His face, usually smug and loud, had gone pale. His eyes kept darting toward the clock, then toward the door, then back to the clock, and then it happened. He stood up so fast his chair screeched across the floor, clutched his stomach like something inside him had just turned to lava and started clawing its way out. He didn't ask to go. He ran out the classroom, down the hallway, straight to the bathroom. He didn't come back. They say karma works slow, but not that day, not with those bears. By the time Polo bolted from the classroom, everyone was too stunned to laugh. He wasn't just walking funny, he was clutching his stomach, face twisted like someone had stabbed him with something sharp and boiling. We heard the door to the bathroom slam open. Then silence. Then screaming. Not yelling, not cursing, screaming. From inside the bathroom. The kind that chills your blood even when you don't know what's happening. No one dared follow at first. Not even the teacher. But the stories spread fast. Some kid in the hallway peeked in and came out looking like he'd seen a crime scene. "He's on the floor," the kid whispered. "Like, on the floor? What's wrong with him? He's dying." That was the rumor anyway. He wasn't, of course, but, to be fair, it sounded like it. What people did say again and again, with slight variations, was that the bathroom reeked like a chemical spill, like something had died, come back to life, and died again. There was moaning, shuffling at one point. Polo yelled, "I'm bleeding," followed by the sound of something slamming against a stall door. The janitor went in around 6 period. He came out 5 minutes later and quit on the spot. Someone said the toilet was filled with blood. That part, never confirmed. But Polo didn't come back to class. Not that day, not the next day, not for a week. When he finally returned, he wore an eye patch, a real one. Thick black strap. Looked like it was straight out of a Halloween costume bin. But there was nothing funny about it. His face was mottled, bruised, in splotches, purplish red spots creeping under the skin like overripe fruit. Petechia, someone whispered. Little blood vessels that burst under pressure, too much pressure, from violent, gut-wrenching pain. He didn't talk about it. No one did. But people started to put the pieces together. The candy, the screaming, the bathroom that was closed for maintenance for 2 whole days. The silence in Polo's posse. No more swagger, just Polo alone, walking with a slight limp, one eye gone dark, skin faded like an old bruise that never quite healed. Right in Marco. Marco didn't say a word, didn't gloat. Just walked past him in the hallway like he didn't even exist, because now he didn't. Polo had become the ghost. The strange thing wasn't that Polo stopped bullying Marco, it was that he stopped being Polo. No more snide comments. No more posse orbiting him like flies around spoiled meat. He walked alone now. Head down. Quiet shoes. Eye patch snug against his face like a symbol of what happens when cruelty finally turns inward. He was small, shrunken not in size but in presence. You could almost feel the fear leaking out of him with every step. Like the pain had rewired his brain. Like the Haribo bears had reached deeper than just his gut and scraped something out of his soul. He still showed up to school, but he moved like someone serving a sentence, not attending class. Sometimes he left early for appointments. Other times he didn't show at all. Word was he'd been to multiple specialists. One rumor said he'd lost partial vision permanently in that eye. Another said the strain had caused something in his gut to rupture. We never got the truth. But honestly, we didn't need it. The silence spoke loud enough. And Marco was finally left alone. He didn't gloat, didn't tell his side, didn't bask in the shift. But something in him changed. He stopped wearing the hoodie, started speaking up in class, just a little, started eating full meals again, sat in the open instead of hiding in corners. The color returned to his skin. The life returned to his steps. He never replaced the scarf, didn't need to. It had done its job in the final thread, tying him to the past. And now he walked free. The jock who had helped him still nodded from across the hall sometimes, but they never really became friends. They didn't need to. That one act of intervention had been enough. It gave Marco the space he needed to take his story back. Polo never looked at Marco again. He couldn't. There was a day, near the end of the school year, where they passed each other in the hallway shoulder to shoulder. Marco kept walking, but Polo, he flinched. And that was justice. Not the kind handed out by principals or detention slips, but real justice. The kind that served cold, in bear-shaped pieces. What Marco did wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It didn't leave Polo with black eyes or broken bones, not the kind you see on the outside. Anyway, but it did leave a mark, a permanent one. And that's where the question sits quiet but heavy. Was it justice, or was it too far? Some people say yes, it was revenge, done right. Polo tormented Marco, ruined him, humiliated and beat him, ripped away every shred of safety he had. And when Marco finally struck back, he did it without laying a single finger on him. He let Polo choose his own punishment, in a way, and boy did Polo choose wrong, but others, they point to the aftermath. Polo didn't just get sick, he got wrecked. Hospital visits, internal damage, permanent vision loss. That's not just payback, that's devastation. It makes you wonder how much is too much, even when you're justified. Maybe Marco didn't want to hurt Polo that badly. Or maybe he did. Maybe he'd finally been pushed so far past human empathy that the only thing left was cold calculation. And the real question isn't what he did. It's what would you have done? If someone broke you day after day. If someone tore apart your body, your mind, your memories until you couldn't even see yourself in the mirror anymore. What would you do if no one else ever lifted a finger? Would you turn the other cheek, or would you weaponize a gummy bear? That's the thing about revenge. It doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with silence and a faint, sour smell drifting from the bathroom stall. And that, my friends, is how a quiet kid with a broken scarf and a bag full of sugar-free gummy bears took down the biggest bully in school without ever raising his voice. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it chews, and cramps, and screams from a locked bathroom stall. If you made it this far, you know this story hit different. Drop a like if you felt that justice hit hard. Subscribe for more tailies where the underdog doesn't just survive, they win. Got your own revenge story? Share it in the comments, I just might tell it next.